Itah Sadu. I'm a storyteller, author, and the managing director of a different Booklist cultural center.
I'm Quammie, a writer, public speaker, and media personality.
So how are you doing?
The pandemic has been interesting on a lot of different levels. There have been some, amazing things that have happened over the last couple of years personally. There have been some devastating things that have happened personally. And just having this weight of the pandemic over top of all of that has just heightened those emotions in a very strange way. Thinking about the isolation aspect, I was just coming out of the end of my marriage just before the pandemic. So I was already trying to get used to a new kind of alone. And then the pandemic hits and it's like, oh, you're not seeing anybody. So then that was a different kind of alone put on top of it. But yeah, it's come with a lot of lessons,
So as a writer, and I'm hanging now with a writer, right? What has the pandemic taught you? How do you feel now about being a writer in Canada? And what that experience is like for you, because a lot of writers have found publishers chasing them. A lot of writers now have a bigger voice in platforms, so many different things. And I can see that the publishing sector is in search of documenting the Black Canadian experience.
Right.
But in your case,
yeah,
what does that mean for you?
Yeah, well, I've been a freelance writer for about 10 years now. And initially when I started out as a blogger. So I blogged first just for myself, just to have something to do when I came home from my stressful healthcare job, to get my mind off of work and do something totally different. And it was my blog that gained the attention of editors and other folks who invited me to write for them. So thinking about, oh, you're gonna pay me $75 for this article that I would have put on my blog for free? Like, that's my dream. I'm set, I'm good. And what I wanted to do and continue doing was telling those stories that I did not see, being kind of a conduit or sharing that voice that I did not hear. And I always thought about my younger self, and I thought about, man, it would have been great if I could have picked up a magazine when I was 17 and read an article from somebody that looked like me and hear about experiences that relate to mine or relate to my mother's or relate to other people who I know, because all of that was missing for me. So I wanted to fill that gap. But at the time, Canada didn't have room for that. And my pitches were constantly turned down if they had anything to do, if there was any hint of Blackness or something that would not be, appealing to a universal audience, when universal really means we're just chasing the white companies and the white audiences and the white advertising dollars. So your story about being a Black whatever does not fit with that. There was a ton of rejection. So I had to take those stories to places that were more open to that, mainly US publications. And as you said, over the last few years with Black Lives Matter coming up, with the other tragic and traumatic things that have happened like George Floyd, and all of that, as you mentioned, happening in the time of the pandemic, there's been a total shift. And there's been a shift on a lot of different levels in Canada, because there's been a slow shift in terms of who are the gatekeepers, who are the people that are able to accept or reject a pitch. Some of that is starting to change. People are starting to realize, like some of these legacy publications are starting to realize, oh, there's a whole segment of an audience in Canada that we just ignored all this time. And maybe they do want to hear these things and see these stories. And not just them, but maybe these are things that other people need to learn and understand as well. So now it's gotten to the point where I used to pitch, I hardly pitch anymore. Now I get the assignments. The editors come to me, do you have thoughts on this? Do you have anything to say about that? I saw you tweeting about this thing. Did you want to write about it? Now they're coming to me like, we want to make space for you, which was never the case before. I had to fight for space. And now the doors are open. And I'm sometimes skeptical of that, because I'm wondering, when is the door going to close again? Is it going to close again? Am I going to be out of style soon when the next thing pops off? So for me, there's a little bit of urgency in terms of don't waste the opportunity now, but also not wanting it to be a trend. So it's like, how do I take advantage of the opportunity and not waste it? But how do I make sure that I cement this so that it becomes a permanent fixture in how we tell stories and whose stories we share here.
So my question, and one of the things that you look at, so over the last couple of years, you know, Black people on TV because, you know, of the pandemic and Black Lives Matter and all of those things. And to say, too, that we've had these moments in history, whether they be civil rights, whether they're in Canada, whether it would be the Sir George A. Williams University experience. So we always come. It was race relations, now it's equity and inclusion. And we can rebrand
But it's the same
things,
conversation.
Right? So I'm curious, so we've been on television talking about our pain, being performative, all those things. But the question for me now is going forward, as I look at the news, am I qualified to speak on war in Europe? Do I have that qualification? Do I have a qualification to speak on environmental matters, climate variation, climate change? So are they calling Black people to talk about those things? That's the interesting part.
That's what's really interesting because for me as a Black writer, and I'm somebody who is proud to hold the title of being a Black writer. I'm not necessarily somebody who says, well, I don't want you to add the Black part. Just think of me as a writer. I'm a Black woman. I'm a Black Jamaican Canadian woman who is a writer, a mother. You know, I do TV, I do public speaking. I'm a lot of things, and I'll own all of that. It's one thing to convince the powers that be, the producers and the editors and the editors-in-chief, that you don't need to just call on me when it's about these issues, but I'm also well equipped to speak on these other things. But it's another thing to convince an audience sometimes. And something that happened to me once was I was doing, you know, a series of segments with CBC's The National. The first segment I did was around Black history. So I knew once that hit the airwaves what was gonna happen. I knew it was gonna happen. And what I expected happened with, you know, the influx of positive responses, but also the negative. The next one I did was on this topic of, you know, speaking up for family caregivers in Canada. And the federal budget was about to come out. And I said, you know, the government needs to do more, needs to have more funding to support family caregivers. And I sat back after that taping, and I was like, I'm good. Nobody's gonna be upset about this because I'm talking about everybody getting more money, and I'm talking about something that impacts so many different Canadians. Nobody's gonna get upset. And one of the first emails I found, because this is the other thing with being, you know, a public person, people can find me on Instagram, find me on Twitter, you know, find me on Facebook, find my personal website, get in my email inbox. So they're finding me everywhere. And one man sent me an email, and it was right after the segment aired, and he said, I don't pay cable and turn on my TV to see an N-word, B-word, talking about anything. Where's Peter Mansbridge? That was his email. And I was like, oh, I didn't expect this. You know, I was naive enough to think that this was, you know, a safe enough topic that none of this would happen. But it goes back to that point of people are not used to seeing us. Okay, me speaking on Black History Month was one thing, but now, oh, they gave you a platform to talk about the federal budget? You're not supposed to be doing that? And it's a whole other thing that you have to overcome.
So you think now that we have two Canadas. We have Black Canada and we have Canada. So when we're talking about Canadian history, are we in that history, or are we Black Canadian history? But I'm going to go to the man in Saskatchewan because in the publishing world sometimes too, in rejections, when your manuscripts are rejected, and the response often is, would the people in Saskatchewan or some other part of the country understand your reference points, understand the accent,
right?
You know,
exactly.
the accent, you know, and you say to them, well, I think that if you publish our work, you will go into the Black, and this is going to be a good thing. And right now, publishers are seeing that we will take them to the Black. A lot of corporations, the whole point around diversity and equity is really to expand bottom lines. Slavery wasn't ended because people felt good or thought it was a bad thing. Slavery ended because it wasn't economically viable. So we always go back to the economics of a thing, right? So So it is fascinating when you go into publishing houses and places like that, and you're sitting with editors or publishers, and they keep reminding you, well, but the rest of the world really get your story.
Right.
And sometimes I think, I went to school in Barbados in the time of colonialism and post-colonialism. And I had to read all these books that came out of the British Empire. I had to imagine flowers that I'd probably never seen in my life. I'm looking at a hibiscus and somebody popping off something at me or telling me about eating cucumber sandwiches.
Right.
And I'm thinking like,
That's not your reality.
So a flying fish sandwich really good, right? No. And I have to imagine all of that.
Right.
So how, and be tested in an exam on that. And an exam too that is going to determine the rest of my life. So if I could imagine that, you want to, in other words, you're telling me Canadians are kind of like stupid people, that they cannot imagine anybody else's experience.
Right.
So that's always a fascinating moment. But I'm going to go to the man in Saskatchewan, and I'm sad for him because I could see his mental health issues of the legacy with his trauma, and that trauma is in his DNA. The guilt of whatever he has done to our community, to First Nations people. There's a lot of trauma with Europeans around their relationship with people of color. So increasingly, when we are faced with these moments of racism, I always like to remind people that historically, anything that we have done as a race and as a people, a lot of other people have benefited for it and benefited in a big way. Do we spend a lot of time talking about mental health? Do we do that informally among ourselves as people? What's your take on this whole thing about mental health? Right. And is it something just peculiar to us, but it also impacts people? What's your take on that?
I think that there is real importance to having those intercommunity spaces to talk about things around Black mental health and what that means to us, because within Black communities, and we think about culture and we think about religion and we think about all these other aspects that play onto how we even see mental health when we are even with our own families, and how we support or we don't support somebody. Somebody's struggling with something, them just mud, and that's it. What does that mean? And those are things that we have to work out within and amongst ourselves. So I think that it's really important. I remember I was doing an interview to join the board of directors for Taibu Community Health Center in Malvern.
Excellent work.
Oh, beautiful, beautiful, amazing place. And I remember it was a panel interview, so there were different folks from the operational side, the board side, and community. And the community representative was an older West Indian man. And something came up where I mentioned postpartum depression. And I was speaking on it as somebody who's experienced it, as somebody who's studied it. And he kind of leaned in and he said, this isn't a question on the paper, but do you think this is a real thing, or is it something that you're eating now that's causing this, or what is it? And I said, you know what? I don't think it's anything it's not the pesticides in the food. I don't think it's any of that. I think these are things that have always existed, but we have never had the language the way we do now, and that's why it's important to have these conversations. So I think there's a lot of good that comes out of that. And I think there's a lot of good that comes out of people who are outside of our experience understanding that there is nuance to what those things look like for us, how microaggressions impact our mental health, how racism impacts our mental health. But you are very correct also in saying that that doesn't give everybody else a pass to say, well, we're the only ones with the issue. There are a variety of issues that are at play at the same time here. So I don't necessarily want to see, the white CEO of a corporation stand up and say, oh, we're donating. Oh, well, it'd be great if they want to donate $50,000 to, the organizations that run Black Mental Health Week and the event. That would be amazing. So don't let me, take money away from anybody. We want that. However, don't think that that's all that needs to be done. What are you doing now when you turn around and you are not considering the impact of microaggressions in your own company and how that's being impacted on your Black employees or your employees of color? What are you doing to address it from the other side? It's not enough to just give the money and say, well, we helped out those poor folks over there. because, they've got their mental health week. What are you doing? What's happening on your end? And how are you standing in the gap to ensure that that doesn't continue, right? Because there are aspects, yes, that come to chemistry, that come to different things, but there's a lot of societal impact too to mental health. And that's not just us being sensitive or reacting. This is us reacting to a very real situation that is being placed on us.
Something you pointed out too, though, is that as a community, we speak formally and informally with each other. And we also too speak in spaces, whether it's probably in church basements, because that seemed to be a community center for us. Wherever we go, whether it's the barbershop, the universities
salon,
of the
all
communities,
of that.
the beauty salon, the universities of the community. But this thing about space, about the gathering of space. When young Black men gather places and students and teenagers. Oh my God, the police, the noise, the threatening, the optics, the perception. Stop somebody. Even if we are not talking, we loud. Just imagine now when we talk, we loud.
Exactly.
Never mind the spirit of our music.
Exactly.
I met this woman the other day in Christie Pitts, and this was a white woman. And she said, when we hear your music, Native music, and African music, we hear the spirit of liberation. And that's what we fear. And so we take punitive action on you. We call the police and we say, the music is loud. But what we are fearing is the spirit of your liberation. And we will not be liberated until you're liberated, because our liberation rests with you, and we've got to claim that. I thought that was very powerful, very honest for her to make that statement in Christie Pitts. And every time that I tell that story, I feel bad because I don't know her name. And it is really important that we name people and give them that sort of ceremony when they say something important. But back to the spaces of gathering. It always seems to me, and I like that you mentioned Taboo, because they have a space and it's incredible. What is this thing that eludes us from having spaces, whether they're cultural, whether they're whatever, where we can gather freely, where young people can come and express themselves? What do you think eludes us from that acquisition of space?
Simply put, it's white supremacy is what does it. And I've seen this happen on individual levels to larger, more collective levels. And I'll explain what I mean. There was one company I worked at when I was in healthcare. We were an agency, worked with adults with brain injury, developmental disability, doing a lot of community work and group home work. And there was quite a few frontline staff that were Black women, right? As we often see in a lot of these care-based industries. The front line will be Black women, women of color, and then as you get up to the executives, it looks a lot different. But at this one company, we would have our lunch times and different things like that, and the Black women would always be nervous about too many of us taking lunch at the same time. Because if we're all sitting in the lunchroom together, another executive or somebody's gonna poke at me, what are you gals talking about? Or kind of walking by and looking a little bit suspiciously at the lunchroom because the 5 of us are sitting there eating our food and laughing and being loud, like you said.
Chips in?
Yeah, all of that.
What language is that again, girl?
all of that, because we make that space and we felt comfortable, and just the 5 of us together was that space for us. But it always came with a level of, oh, watch out. And if somebody starts asking a question, okay, maybe 2 of them are gonna go back to their desk and finish their lunch, and kind of just dilute it a bit. So even on an individual level, there is that restriction of ability to have that space. Then we get into the bigger side of it, where we're looking, people are looking for funding for cultural spaces. And I'm gonna talk to you about that in a second. But people who are looking for funding to create spaces for young Black children to come for programs, or, for music lessons or drumming lessons and dance lessons, and the struggle that people face with the fine print and the red tape and the bureaucracy to prove that this is a valid use of space, it's all rooted in, and what that woman said, I was really blown away with her self-awareness to bring that up in terms of the fear, that fear of liberation, that fear of what happens if too many of them get together and start to change everything and make everybody else uncomfortable? So how do we restrict that, and how do we make it as hard as possible for them to do that? Those things are still playing out today.
It is important, and I should tell you too, that when that woman made the statement at Christie Pitts, it was on the Emancipation Day. And a different Booklist Cultural Center decided that in 2021, again with the pandemic, there was no carnival.
Yes.
And also to create awareness with people that carnival is perhaps the most public retention of African expression and resistance.
Exactly.
Right? Like to just, people think, okay, jump on wave, kind of cool, right? But no, it took a big moment to get to this thing. And so what we did was, we said we were going to emancipate Bloor Street. And what that simply meant was having people come out in whatever their themes are and their expressions were. So we had a section called resilience, resistance. Then we had the liberation sections through the years till we came down to the Black Lives Matter, and on and on and on and on, this thing. Now, it was really interesting at Young and Bloor. Young and Bloor, we started there. Young and Bloor, after Jane and Finch, is probably the second most famous intersection in the country. Oh my God, I said that. Pop off now, right? So we having a good time, right? So after the second most famous intersection in the country, we are at Young and Bloor, and there's this curiosity, like, what do you
what's
do?
This?
What is this? What is happening? And then people thought that we were a little carnival. When we hit Bay, and when we hit between Bay and Avenue Road, now that's a whole different world right there. They were like, oh my God, I hope they're not coming back. Like, I hope this is a one-time thing. Like, what the hell? Like, this is our space, right?
Exactly.
It was just really interesting to see all the different reactions as we were going on. And all along the road, we had steel panists playing.
Okay.
Again, an instrument of liberation. Exactly. An instrument with an incredible history. When we got to the ROM now, and in that block now, from like Avenue Road down to St. George or wherever now, that was like the crying block. I didn't know whether because Oisey was part of that block, and they control the education and the thinking of our children and all of that. And then there was the ROM, and the ROM has its little historical trauma and all of that. But I found it was so interesting that people in that stretch cried with us. Oh my God, we're so touched with emancipation. They started to cry. Before between Avenue Road, it was like, no, hell no.
Like,
you
no,
people not coming. People not coming. And at Young and Bloor, it was like, okay, kind of exotic. We could sell you all, this is a fashion station. You make it, you're next to hold rent fuel car, you're coming good. And then when we got to like Spadina, it was just interesting.
Yeah, to see just that one stretch.
Just this one stretch, how people were received. So it was important too for me to tell you the little bit of a heads up of how when we got to Christie Pitts. And at the end of the day, and she came after the drums. She came at the very end of the ceremony, where she even asked permission to say these words to us.
Oh, wow.
So again, I'm really sorry I don't remember that woman's name, because that was an incredible moment of honesty.
Within that day,
So we repeatedly, and especially for young people, when you have the malls close at 9, and you still need a space that you just want to hang with your peeps. But you can't do that because of the pressure of the police or somebody thinking that you are going to break the law. The environments too that you go into. Sometimes I think that, and I want your opinion on this, that the narrative is to change this sort of benefactor, I need to help you situation. Because now when you also create centers and spaces for people of African descent. One of the things I got to say, though, straight up, Quammie, for the longest time I didn't say black people, right? I would say African Canadians.
Okay.
But I noticed that COVID and the government money changes kind of that, because not even the nationalists beat you up in a meme. Like, no, it's not, it's African Canadian money. It's easier to say black money, it's faster, and we got faster needs. So I just want to say that as a little bit.
Evolution, right? Exactly.
Right? Yeah. But my point in all of this is this continuing being eluded around space and how hard and difficult it is for people to gather. And then, and also to the impact that it has on our children.
Yes.
When our children see us or hear us every single day having the same conversations about how hard it is at work, how difficult it is to raise money, how difficult it is to own something.
Yeah.
And when we go into spaces that people provide for us, because how can I help you? How can I not lift you up, but how can I just reach down to you
And give you
this little something,
Yeah.
something. What's your take on all of that?
That it's extremely frustrating, like the benefactor aspect that you mentioned, because it comes with a level of distrust and disbelief in possibility. And I see this happen a lot in the creative worlds that I'm in, and mentorship programs and training programs. You know, these big corporations want to help the next generation of young Black screenwriters
Please
or
help us now.
podcasters or whatever. And they help by doing what? Oh, we're gonna pair you with a mentor. And then you're looking at, for me to look at some of, the resumes of the people who are seeking to get a mentor, and it's like, no, you need to just give her funding to make her film. She doesn't need a mentor.
You go, girl.
Give her the money to make her film. Give her that, because she will run with it and it'll be incredible. But it goes back to this distrust and disbelief in possibility. Oh, this young Black girl can't possibly manage a budget for a film, or we can't possibly give her a book deal, or we can't possibly just give her funding to do X, Y, and Z. We need to we'll give her some help so that maybe she can think about how she will do it, and she'll go ask somebody else for the money. No, we're ready now. We are ready to create, we're ready to build, we're ready to do the things that we need to do for our people. And we don't need the help. We don't need that. And even when it comes to mentorship and sponsorship, there's a big difference.
The handout. We don't need the handout.
Yeah.
We need the hookup, the big hookup.
Exactly. Speak my name in a room. Let somebody know about me who is a game changer, who can do something. Mentors play their role, yes. We need mentors to help guide us and to have that shoulder to go to and say, how do I navigate? We need that. But I think in our communities, we are good at doing that for each other. We create that for each other. When it comes to outside of that now, I need the sponsor. I need the person who's gonna cut the check. I need the person who's gonna introduce me to the other big wig. Let me come in and do my elevator pitch. All I need is the opportunity. I don't need you to tell me how to make the elevator pitch. I got it. Get me in the room so I can say it now.
That politicians often say, when elected, if elected, right? So give me the opportunity. And when I have it, I'm going to deliver.
There we go. There we go. So it comes back to the same thing with space. It comes back to the same thing with the disbelief and distrust and possibility of what that means. But that's what I want to ask you. With the creation, with what you've done with A Different Booklist and the Cultural Center, I can only assume and imagine, hearing what you're saying about space and thinking about what that has meant for you to create that now. But what has that journey been like for you, and how has that evolved through time as you've seen different needs come up, or different answers that need to be given to questions? What does that look like for you as you've created that space?
Oh, I think it made me an elder in 30 seconds.
You went to Auntie real quick, right?
Booyah. One thing too, even before I jump to that, I want to say, and you make the point about youth, and I find that government, we are going to help the future generations. Now, we need help for the parents of those future generations.
That's true,
Just
too.
be clear.
That's true, too.
And when I've traveled the world and I've gone to missions, Canadian embassies or consulates or any of those things, and sometimes they're my host, and I look at the wall of the pictures around. If I'm going to see people of color, or especially people of African descent, Black people, I'm going to see children. I would never really ever see adults. Even when I come into Pearson Airport sometimes, there's a subtlety. The multiple pictures that I see or graphics of people of color are in children. It's always the future.
Right.
But then I question
now
what is happening in the now.
That's so important. That's so critical too.
Right?
Because who is leading the children? Who's guiding the children? And what assistance do they need? Or what opportunities or doors need to be opened for them, right? So that's very true.
And the other thing too is, the modeling queen, don't you? That's a reggae tune, right? Is it mentorship or is it apprenticeship? Because that's the tradition that we come out of, and those are things that we have to claim.
That's true.
You are a writer. I'm a storyteller. So I would have had to been mentored with a griot.
Yes.
I would have to be apprenticed with the griot. It wasn't I'm going to go to somebody to mentor me, because in the community, people model. You're in the health sector, and we sort of alluded a little bit to that before,
Yeah.
we had midwives.
Yes.
When I grew up in Barbados, the woman next door to me, Miss Richards, was a midwife. She had another woman in training. How did she have that woman in training? I don't know. But what I do know, and what the whole community knew that she was transferring knowledge to this
the next.
other
Yes.
young woman
Yes.
who would become that midwife.
Right.
And that midwife would come then and say, B. Quammie, are you have an interest in being a midwife? Come join me now.
Yes.
And you start that indigenous
it.
knowledge.
Yes.
Now today, midwifery is coming back, and midwives are pushing. But and for people, anybody who's listening to this tape, and I hope the producers put in it, midwifery and have a midwife is not a middle class luxury. It comes out of working class people's
Yes.
history.
Yes.
It's a
Yes.
good thing
Yes.
and a decent thing, and the government allows it to pay for it, because sometimes it is this notion that I have to have 1.5 children in a particular
Right.
house to have
Right.
midwifery. Back to the acquisition now of space and the center. We are located, as you know, on Bathurst Street.
Yes.
And in Bathurst Street, you can go from the 1800s of Deborah Brown's and the Underground Railroad, the Hubbard and being, the acting mayor. Anything of a first in the city
that space.
is in that space. Letter carrier, person who work at the transit, on and on it goes. Bev Maskell, a woman, I'm looking at you and we looking fine, but also I'm conscious that there was a woman who called Bev Maskell and she drove around in her car, going to Buffalo to bring beauty products back.
yes.
Today, while Summer, the makeup artist, was doing the makeup, I had all these thoughts in my head
Right.
that at one point in time, she wouldn't have had culturally appropriate makeup to put on us. We probably
Exactly.
could all look like Lena Horne, you know what I'm saying? So we good, right? And here was Bev Maskell, this
Yes.
entrepreneur who brought us them products into Canada so that we would have dignity and
Exactly.
pantyhose and all that kind
of
of
those
stuff.
things.
Yeah.
Yes.
So when you are in a street or in a community where the roots of your culture and your people are so deep, well, it just seems automatic that you'd want to make them deeper.
Exactly.
It just
Exactly.
seems automatic, right?
Exactly.
While we are pulling up a lot of things in the city, at the same time, it was important for a different Booklist, the bookstore, to recognize that so much navel stringberry on Bathurst Street, so much blood on Bathurst Street
Yes.
that belonged to people of African descent. It just makes sense to make the roots deeper.
Yes.
There is no hard and fast rule that is written that when a developer comes into a neighborhood, you have to go and move. Really it is, right?
Yes.
They might squeeze you out, they're going
Right.
to push you out, but really there isn't anything that is written to say that you have to move.
Right.
And so when we saw that the Mervish development and that empire had come to its time, the question for us was, how do we respond to redevelopment?
Yes.
How do we respond to gentrification?
Yes.
That was important for us as a bookstore because we sell books, and half of those books talk about how people overcome challenges, how people respond to things. So you can't really be selling shoes, you know what I mean? And your shoes kind of look a kind of way still. So if you're selling books, you have to read the books, and those books too have to inform you.
And they
They're
have to
just
live
not
that, yeah.
for the people that you're selling them to. So how do we respond to that? And so we decided that we would go to the developer first, because in this equation of things, we always seem to come at the last minute.
Right.
That this developer is so big and scary and all of that we can't even deal with the person. You know what I'm saying? And that developer's name was Gillespie. That fascinated me. So I began to think of Dizzy Gillespie, right?
yeah.
Because we have to draw now on what is indigenous to us, what we know that is in our DNA. Oftentimes in the world, we go to apply the same techniques and the same things that the other communities and the European and the Eurocentric way of doing things.
Right.
I look to Africa. I look to the Caribbean in my DNA of how we are going to respond.
Yes.
And as a storyteller, call and response is important.
Yes.
Engagement.
Yeah, we live on
And
that.
so everything that I think I do in life is to see what that call is and how we're going to respond. And so we were sort of, yes, we could be part of this development and what that means. And what that meant to be Quammie is to go to every single meeting, every single one. Send
And be
everybody
there.
that you know to every single meeting so that you were informed.
Yes.
But then a beautiful thing happened. And this is because of the importance of books and knowledge.
Yes.
And also, too, this is a beautiful thing happened because people of African descent, Black people, put a very high have high importance when it comes to education. There's a narrative out there that our children, don't like to read, and we don't show up at teacher-parent stuff because we don't care about education. No, it ain't that. Is you're working 10 jobs and your teacher gonna really intimidate you when you get, and you feel a kind of way still, right? So it is with some of that that propelled us to move forward. And then you look for the allies. And I don't usually say allies, I say comrades, because allies sometimes for me is a wishy-washy thing.
Exactly, you can dip in and dip out when you feel like,
And then you look, and what we noted in the community around us, the other communities, they were speaking now on our behalf because of the importance of books, because what they had seen us demonstrate for 20 years.
That's right.
So it is the spirit of Africa, and the spirit of resistance.
That's it.
It is listening to what you sell. It is bringing in the comrades and the people in the neighborhood and that advocacy role that has led us to this spot. If you ask me if the battle was easy, oh gosh, I tell you, the battle is ongoing every day.
I'm sure it's not done yet. Exactly.
It is. Because you can have a great story, but how is the story going to end? You can take the story to this particular chapter, but there's also the thinking in the society that they have to end the story for you. If you perform well in the society, what does that mean? That you don't need help? That lets you off the hook.
Right,
yeah?
exactly.
If you perform well in the society, are you penalized? Sometimes when I'm in an interview and people ask, are you doing well, or is your organization doing well? I sit there and I have to think about that. And that is where oppression comes in. I have to think about that answer, because if I say I'm doing well, I can be penalized.
Yeah, exactly.
And if I say I'm not doing well, I am penalized.
That's it.
So there is this ongoing challenge of us with the acquisition of space, and I think largely because of fear. Last little story I'm going to tell, and then I want to ask you something. One day, the Roach family donated their grand piano to us. Oh my God, baby grand piano, all right? And so there was lots of excitement. The piano came in at 11 o'clock. I don't play piano, and nobody that was there that day played piano in the cultural center, right? The security guard came at 6. From the condo. And she walked up and down and up and down. She's curious, she's real curious, right? So finally I couldn't take it no more. So I went and I said to her, why are you walking up and down and looking in? She says, oh, because somebody's complaining about the noise. Nobody played the piano. They saw the piano coming.
Exactly.
And immediately.
That had to mean rambunctiousness.
Something. Yeah.
Exactly.
So when you're writing now, going forward as a writer, what are some of the things that are in your spirit? So what are some of the things that you see that you think is important, that not only for Canadians to know, but the world to know? Where are you at with that?
Wow, that's a big question. I think for me, there's a lot that is a lot that's hidden that needs to be uncovered. And those are the things that I find myself drawn to. So when I was pregnant with my second daughter, my biggest craving was ackee and saltfish.
Okay,
I mean, that's always been my favorite meal, but something in these pregnancy hormones amplified that to a million, to the point where I would go to whichever West Indian restaurant was nearby, try and get there early on a Saturday morning. When they were sold out, I'd start bawling. Literally, I've cried in 3 Jamaican restaurants over them running out of ackee and saltfish with my belly, and they understood what was going on. And I said, I just needed this ackee and saltfish. Anyways, I started to do some research into okay, so how did ackee and saltfish even come to be? Because I remember, my mother, my grandmother, my aunts talking about, oh, you have to make sure it's ripe, you have to make sure you cook it properly because you're poison and this and that. So I'm like, so how many people got sacrificed in eating the poison ackee to understand what to do so that now I can be crying about it in the middle of sunrise or wherever I'm at, right? And I did some research and I learned that, ackee has a story of coming through the slave trade, where there was a seed, and even the name ackee is related to the Twi word, anki, that they still use in Ghana.
That's right.
So you have not just the seed itself that came over on a ship with our enslaved ancestors to Jamaica, but the language as well, which is a whole other thing that's really fascinating to me. So now we have this seed and this plant that grows in Jamaica. Then we have the saltfish, the codfish aspect. And I remember talking to my mom, and she remembered, growing up, and, the tins or whatever would be stamped with like, Nova Scotia, Nova Scotia, Nova Scotia. So I did my research, and I learned that throughout the slave trade, another way that Canada benefited economically was in trading the scraps of cod that would have been thrown away after they sent the good cuts to Portugal and, England and other areas of Europe. The plantation owners in the Caribbean realized we need some sort of protein. We got to give these people something to keep them running through the day because the berries and the leaves is not doing it. We got to give them something, and we don't want to give them our good cut of meat. So let's trade the rum and the sugar to these, Atlantic provinces, and just send us what you're going to throw away anyway. We'll give it to them, they'll figure it out. So that's how codfish and saltfish got down to the Caribbean and became such a staple in the diet, was through the slave trade again. And I remember, so I wrote a piece about it for a food magazine. I've done events about it, whole events about saltfish. You would have never thought that it would be so amazing, but whole events just about codfish for 2 hours. We're talking about it.
Sometimes when I think about it, I think it's a diabetic treat. I give you rum, you give me sugar.
Right, exactly.
And salt, oh my God, diabetes.
Honestly, it's a whole other thing. But in thinking about that and doing just even the uncovering of that for myself, right? And I remember tweeting out the link to the story that I wrote about the history of ackee and saltfish and saying, hey, Canada, we have a role to play in this too, and it's not pretty. And the amount of people who were so angry with me for defacing Canadian history and then pulling at the little details. Well, when that happened, Canada wasn't officially a country. The Confederacy hadn't happened yet. And I said, did the Confederacy happen when we were bragging about the Underground Railroad? No, but we claimed that. So why do we claim that? Because it makes us look good. But now I'm pointing out something else we were doing. Has Nova Scotia and Newfoundland given back the money that they got to build what eventually became our provinces? Did they give that money back? No. So we benefited from it. And the same way we take the bad, or the same way we take the good that we've done, we have to take the bad. All these things were happening at the same time. Canada wasn't officially a country. Okay, we can go tit for tat on that. And uncovering history like that, uncovering even myself as a youngish Black woman, parents who immigrated here, raised me and my two siblings in London, Ontario, my story of coming to Toronto, now me raising my two children as the official, real first Canadian babies because they're the Canadian babies born to Canadian parents now. What does this look like in terms of culture and how we maintain culture?
Should be a national day for that.
Honestly, right? We need it. We need it. We need it. But these are all things I just like to bring about the stories that we don't hear, because what happens from that, even just from the, and not to minimize my work, but just where my work has gone. Sometimes I'm so, singular on what I do. And I'm just like, okay, I'm doing this, and I'm moving on to the next thing, and I'm not thinking about the impacts when these things are out in the world. But having people from different countries read things I've written, and even if they can't relate specifically to say, oh, I'm also a Black woman who has this type of background or story, there might be something they can relate to that nobody has ever really voiced the way I voiced. And for the women who do look like me and have lived the life that I live, they don't find people who are telling those stories. And something that you had mentioned before made me think about when we're talking about, I think you mentioned it with like midwifery and how it's become kind of, this economical standard, but that's not where it initiated from. And I think about the aspects of Black culture, the culture of, throughout the Caribbean, people of African descent, and how it is respected for its entertainment factor, but not its esteem, right? And I want to continue to bring esteem to these things, not to prove to anybody that they should value it, but just to show it. Just to show it, and just to say, like you're talking about Carnival, the history of that, the history of resistance, not just the pretty costume and, bottom out and this out and everything out. That's not what it is. There's a story behind that, and it is an esteemed story, and it's something that we all need to know. So not just the entertainment aspect that makes you feel good when you hear the song and then you turn it off and you go back to your life. There's esteem to the lives that we live and the history that we have and the things that we create. So I think I'm really drawn by uncovering these histories, sharing my own aspects, because again, I still think about that young me. I still think about that little me who didn't have things. I think about my mother who came here and didn't have certain things to even reflect her experience. And I'm still writing for them. I'm still creating for them with them in mind. And then people now are benefiting, but I'm always thinking about them.
As my mother is in her 90th year. And my mother came in the 1950s, 1957, I believe.
Yes.
And she came in that first wave of domestics out of
Another huge
the
aspect,
Caribbean.
yes, West
And she
Indian
was
domestic scheme.
Group of 25. Wow. And also, too, I want to say, heads up to people like Donald Moore, people like Harry Geary, and a whole bunch of folks, Stanley Grizzell, and there were a number of women there who made that journey to Ottawa to petition the Canadian government to open up immigration. Here's the moment. Not just for people from the Caribbean, but for racialized people around the world. Now, here's the thing. Here, they could have gone and said, oh, just give me people from the Caribbean. But again, every time that we've had a movement, how our movement impacts others.
Exactly, exactly.
And my mother, I notice as she gets later on in her life, she always reminds me that today you are standing, all of you are standing, which you've just said, on the shoulders of these women who first came to Canada. My mother came here, I think maybe 17 or something like that, from Barbados, in Ottawa, or someplace real cold like Montreal.
Exactly.
You know, and you're all by yourself.
That's it.
No family, nobody.
Family could come, nobody could come with you.
And how they were able to navigate, how they were able to build dreams, how they were even to send for children back home.
Exactly.
And so every day she reminds me of that space. You cannot take the women who came as domestics. And even in this conversation that I'm saying this, I'm also mindful of people who have gone on to do incredible things in the country. When I think about Jean Augustine, that was the way you came. But people who came through the domestic program they were teachers, they were educators. And I will keep saying this in this conversation because there is a narrative that we have to impact, that we don't care about education. We're loosey-goosey about that.
Right.
You know, so it's really important that we push back on that.
Exactly.
When there is a platform, and let's say the carnival, carnival comes out of that street theater, you're making a statement about the society. You're the social conscience of the society in that moment going down the street. Hip hop was statements about the society, statements about the conditions of people in the tradition of the griots, in the tradition of praise chanters. This is who we are. This is the bravado I come in with.
Right.
And I need to say it because nobody else is talking about me in such a way, right?
That's it.
But here's the thing, though. How long then does the state and government and in a society allows that? Because if I have a group of people making conscious statements, political statements, speaking to the social consciousness of a society, then that is going to put a different kind of thinking into the citizens of a nation. So if I go to feather and costume, I'm good with that. It looking good. I could sell it more. Because, you know, you can sell a thong for $7,000. You know what I mean? You know, you can't sell a big costume for $7,000, but a thong you can.
It can go.
That's imaginative, right? So capitalism then says, we can make more money. And here's the thing. We can disrupt the narrative. So we're going to present beauty. Nothing political is going to be said about this.
Just the prettiness.
Go over here on hip hop. So I hear you and about your conditions and all of that now. But now I'm going to go now maybe for what's in the gutter, and I'm going to dumb it down. So I'm going to promote all the dumb and dumb stuff. So now that when people hear the music, the spirit of resistance, the spirit of rebellion, this is what they're hearing.
Right.
All right?
The weak side.
The weak side of things. So this is where I think when you say that you want to protect it, what I'm hearing is you want to protect that integrity.
Exactly. That integrity and the power behind that.
So therefore, is it a question then that is, it is always important to know what came before?
Yes.
Right? It's like Sankofa.
Exactly.
Looking back.
We have to live that.
Looking at what we're doing to move forward.
Exactly. I'm fascinated with what we've talked about around space and how important that is, and the different ways that we create space or we're restricted from space. And I think about the bookstore, I think about the center. How do you see it evolving? How do you see the necessity of the space you have created evolving? What are the things that you maybe keep your finger to the pulse of? Or what are you looking around to kind of guide how you shape that space now and going forward in the future?
My response to that, again, is call and response. We started as a bookstore. Yeah. And the bookstore still exists, so let me not say something. It's something in the past, right?
Exactly.
And one day, the man who does the window cleaning, who did the signage, rode up on his bicycle. And when we were at the bookstore on the other side of the street, he added Cultural Center, a different book list, and he just came one day and added Cultural Center.
Wow.
So the community in their conversation
dictated what
and
that
this
space
man
is.
come in to put those two words. We didn't ask him to do that. We're watching these people, but this is Black people, they get into your business, right? So he just woke up and thought, I'm just going to add Cultural Center. But what it was, he had overheard a conversation before, maybe some weeks ago, and where people say, you're not a bookstore, you're a Cultural Center.
Right.
So this was his moment. The community has said to us over time, we need a space to gather. As a bookstore, the community came and said, I want to show movies, I want to dance, I want to meet cousin, I want to do all those things. And because we were so tiny and so small, we became the love up space. Excuse me, I need to get by. I know I love you, but you're in the way. So out of that organic expression came the Cultural Center, a different book list Cultural Center. My thinking is, and our thinking is, what is the need? What do we hear the people who are coming through the doors of the Cultural Center, what are they asking for? And now that it is our responsibility to make a response.
Yes.
Any idea or any person who comes through the Cultural Center with an idea, we embrace that idea. There is no idea that has ever come through that Cultural Center that we've said to that person, not working. No, it's a bad idea.
Yes.
But we say to people, do you know, I know B. Quammie, right? I think she's working on something similar because now you have to guard integrity and people's business and so.
Right.
So I think that you may want to call on her to see if there's a common interest. And I'm going to repeat that, common interest. I think the Cultural Center, a different book list Cultural Center, is a vision. It's not an idea. It is a vision that people have had from the time my mother came to this country, right? We have social services organizations. We have great ones. We have Tropicana.
Yes.
We have the JCA. And much enough respect to the JCA because that's Jamaican muscle and power and rubber dub and everything going on in that. Credit union, everything.
All of that, yes.
But in terms of cultural spaces, this is where the power now, you get a pushback because everyone knows the power of the role of arts and culture within a society. When a revolution happens, when a war happens, you look for the writers, the people who are the journalists, the everybody, you're rolling them up.
Telling the story.
Yeah. Right, telling the story. So we don't take that role lightly at all, lightly at all. But to answer your question, again, it is what is the community saying to us about what they see? What is this deep-seated idea and vision that they've had for such a long time? Are we manifesting this thing? What role can they play? At every step of the way, we look for ways where the public can be engaged. When we moved across the street, we said to everybody, you're coming and pick up all the boxes and everything, you're moving across the street.
I remember.
When we cut the ribbons, everybody came with a scissors and a ribbon and you cut. No, not just important people. Everybody cut in one time. But then we took those people's names and they wrote them on the ribbons and now they have become banners so that people can see I have been part of something.
Exactly.
We're now going to go forward and we're going to be bold and say, we are going to be called Blackhurst Cultural Center, right? Rocking that.
We love it.
And now we're going to say to the public, you can be engaged by designing the logo. How is that? So call and response. If you can engage the community, we are not about young people and youth programming, right? Youth come in all the time. We don't have to call up youth and say, come today, the minister comes, so you gotta look like young people and wear black pants and white shirt and you're sitting at some dinner and somebody's saying some craziness like, oh yeah, those are the youth from the Cultural Center. We don't roll it like that. We are a Black-led organization that is opening to all Canadians, because you can't talk to yourself. You can't keep talking among yourself. You have to talk with others. And then they're comrades. So you have that engagement because they share a common interest. So we are a Black-led organization that is open to all Canadians. What is innovative? What is excited? I'm excited here talking to you because in the backdrop of all of this that people can't see, there's a whole lot of young people with big technology and equipment. The director is a woman. You know, she calling the shops, cutting me off and all of that kind of thing, right? And at the end of the day, the importance of the Cultural Center is to know this, that we cannot rewrite history, but to place things in their proper historical context. We don't want to say that we are first cultural center because the first Black cultural center maybe in this country was a church basement. And if I have to say today in 2022 that this is a first cultural center, we should be ashamed of ourselves because we have not valued that church basement.
What came before?
That home service little place, that barber shop or beauty salon, where people, whatever, these Susu ladies who brought their monies together to have banking, all of that, right? So that is what I'm desirous to see. And that is who we are. And that is how the center informs itself on this journey to self-determination.
Standing on the shoulders, and now you are the next shoulders. For us
I say that, and I like to say, no, I'm a leg in the relay race, right?
Yes, you're still running,
The baton has to be passed, but here's the thing, never stay long at the fair, and to know. So where I am at now in my life is to look at all the people who are doing brilliant things and to say, you are the next set of people who are going to run this cultural center when we cross Jordan again. You're feeling me with
beautiful.
that? So it could be you, B. Quammie, that I can call and say, B. Quammie, I liked you. I had such a great time with you. I think you're smart too bad. Why don't you come and join us? Because maybe you will be the leadership of this. That is the power and the spirit of people of African descent, to look at someone and to see their potential and to think, this is where you, and I'm going to say this, will land. Not could, will land. Yeah.
That's beautiful.